At her peak, she was introduced on television as one of the greatest dancers in the world, and for a while, she was everywhere. Welcome to The Rest of the Story, my weekly series where I dig into the lives behind the dance legends, here on my podcast, Hey Dancer. I'm your host, Miller DeRay, and as per usual, this episode is strictly dance-centered. There's always so much you can say, especially about today's subject. So, in the outro, I will touch on a few other aspects of her life, including the one time she actually watched me dance. Yeah, me. If you're enjoying this series, you find it entertaining, educational, inspirational, make sure you're subscribed or following along. Hit that notification bell so you are alerted when a new video drops. Give it a like, share with your dance fam, comment. It all helps a podcaster out. Okay, let's get into it. She was born in Bombay in 1936, the second child of an Anglo-French marriage. She was only about 15 or 18 months old when her family noticed it. She'd pull herself up to the radiogram, a piece of furniture that combined a radio and record player, and bounce along to the music, totally on the beat. This very small child was already so aware of rhythm. Right from the beginning, she was always dancing. Her father, a successful businessman, died when she was just 3. Not long after, her mother moved the family to South Africa, and it was there that things really began. At 4, she was enrolled in ballet school, and by 7 or 8, her first teacher, Olwyn Levison, could really see it. The legs, the musicality, the discipline. She wasn't just talented, she was serious. At 9, her training began to intensify, festivals and concerts and the like. After school, she'd gather her friends on the lawn and conduct her own ballet classes, leading the group, showing the steps, taking it all very seriously. Even then, dance wasn't just something she did, it was something she shared. By the time she was 12, she was told, if you're serious, you need to go to Johannesburg. That's where the real training was. Specifically, she needed to audition for Marjorie Sturman, a teacher known for her toughness and technical brilliance. But her mother hesitated. Should she really send her daughter off before finishing school? So, this mother spoke to her teacher. And this teacher did not hesitate. He thought this little girl should go. She was smart enough, you see, but her focus in class was always somewhere else. Her feet were always moving under the desk, the teacher would notice, quietly practicing what was clearly ballet steps. It was quite apparent to this teacher that this girl was already dancing her way out. And so she auditioned for Sturman. She got in, but barely. Marjorie told her she had all kinds of bad habits that would have to be broken. But the foundation was there, and she got to work. At 14, she joined the corps of the Johannesburg Festival Ballet. At 16, she made history, the youngest dancer in South Africa to perform the Queen of the Willis in Giselle. She credited her height, her elevation, and her beats, but it was more than that. She had presence. Still, the ceiling in South Africa was low, and so her mother told her, if you really want to make it, you'll have to go to London. Her stepfather gave her 6 months of financial support. If she hadn't found work by then, she'd have to come home. She took the deal, and within weeks of arriving in London, she was already earning her living. At first, it was chorus work. She had met a few South African girls in London, and they happened to be a bit ahead of her. You know, they knew the scene, the auditions, the city. She ended up rooming with them, and they helped her find her footing. Together, they auditioned for the Festival Ballet and got in, but only as extras. They weren't given featured roles, but being part of the company meant they could take class with them. And that, more than anything, was the real opportunity. Daily training and exposure to directors. Still, it only got her so far. She went to Sir Anton Dolan, the company's artistic director, and asked if there was any chance she might actually be cast in a featured role. He told her no. She was too tall. At 5'7.5", she was considered out of range for British ballet at the time. So when one of her friends mentioned an audition for an American musical film, she decided to go. It was Gentlemen Marry Brunettes, choreographed by Jack Cole and assisted by Gwen Verdon. Now, she'd never done jazz, but when Cole started the audition with ballet, well, she more than kept up. She got cast. What she couldn't know was that Jack Cole was also testing for something else. He was already thinking ahead to Kismet, a lavish stage musical set in ancient Baghdad, and he was looking to see who could handle his signature blend of jazz and stylized Middle Eastern movement. She made the list. So before Kismet came to be, and after filming Gentlemen Marry Brunettes, she booked a job at the London Palladium, a 1954 holiday pantomime called Mother Goose. Peter Sellers, still an unknown at the time, was also in the cast. She started in the chorus, but when the lead dancer didn't work out, she and her roommates, yeah, they were in that job together too, were asked to audition. And she got it. Promoted to a featured role, a real breakthrough. She'd go on to land the role Jack Cole had remembered her for in Kismet. She played Princess Samaris and danced a featured solo to Not Since Nineveh. That show ran for nearly 20 months, and it was a turning point. After Kismet, she booked a cabaret job in Paris through a man who had watched her ballet classes. This is a guy who helped dancers find work across Europe. So she was there for a few months when a motorbike accident sidelined her, taking her out for 3 full months. But soon after, another opportunity came, this time in Italy, with a touring revue starring the comic Macario. And that is where Hermes Pan, the most prolific choreographer in film history, saw her. He had come to see the show. See, he was choreographing Cleopatra in Rome at the time, and his company knew the company she was dancing with. They all went out to dinner afterward, and by the end of the night, he told her she had to come to America. She really knocked me over, he later said. Quote, she's one of the greatest dancers I think I've ever seen, end quote. They exchanged addresses and kept in touch, and 2 years later, while she was working in Spain, he sent word. He was choreographing Can-Can for 20th Century Fox. He'd been talking about her to the studio, and they were interested. Would she send photographs? So she literally sent everything she had, and she got the contract. But there was one problem. She was still under contract in Spain. She was the second lead in the show, and the producers refused to let her out early. She was ready to give up, but her boyfriend urged her to go, told her she couldn't let this chance slip by. Conveniently, the one flight daily to America was scheduled between her 2 daily performances. So she danced the first show, then grabbed her passport, jumped in a cab, and headed to the airport. She arrived in America, but didn't know a soul in the US of A except for Hermes Pan. He let her stay at his place while she found her footing. On set, there was already buzz. Hermes had talked her up to everyone, and now they were watching to see if she could deliver. He asked her to open the Adam and Eve ballet in Can-Can to play the Bird of Paradise. In rehearsal, she lifted her leg in a slow extension, then turned, pirouetted, and floated off stage. Her line, her control, her balance, the crew gasped, and Hermes exhaled. She was everything he said she was. Originally, she'd been cast as Celestine, but when another dancer dropped out, her role was expanded to include Claudine, a more prominent part with even more dancing. She now had 2 major solos, a featured number with Frank Sinatra, and that unforgettable moment in blue-green snakeskin. Sliding down the branches of the Tree of Life, the reviews for the film were mediocre, but she was constantly singled out. The New York Times, for example, called her a strapping young dancer and the only one to give some class to her role. That was the launchpad. She began appearing in television specials and was soon cast opposite Elvis Presley in G.I. Blues, his first movie after returning from military service. The film was light, even corny at times, but it was a box office smash, one of the top-grossing movies of the year, and she made an impression. Her poise, her presence, her chemistry with Elvis, and her dancing elevated the film. Reviewers noted it. Audiences loved her. Suddenly, she wasn't just working, she was everywhere. Her name was in the trades, her photo in the papers. By this point, her fame was global. And the studio took notice. They asked her to return for Elvis's next picture, Blue Hawaii. She went to the costume fitting, but once she read the script, she turned it down. The role was too thin, too generic. There was nothing in it that built on what she had already done. They told her to do it or face suspension. She chose the suspension, 7 weeks. By the end, she had just $100 to her name, but she stood by the decision. She went to Jack Cummings, the producer of Can-Can, and asked for help. He was working on the second time around with Debbie Reynolds. At first, there was nothing for her, but then he remembered a small part, a saloon girl. He rewrote it, expanded it, even added a dance number just for her. And just like that, she was back on her feet. Soon after, she took another leap. She was still under contract to 20th Century Fox, but she sued to break it, and she won. It was a bold move, but one that allowed her to take control of her own career. What came next wasn't always cinematic, but it was consistent and impactful. She took on Vegas. Her first big show in Las Vegas was Irma La Douce at the Riviera Hotel, and it broke box office records. From there, she launched her own nightclub act, played the Flamingo, headlined across the Strip. She was becoming a Vegas icon. Then came an offer to audition for Sweet Charity, the Vegas production. But this wasn't just any audition. She had to fly to New York and walk into a room where Bob Fosse, Gwen Verdon, Neil Simon, and Cy Coleman were all waiting for her. It was the first professional audition she'd done since her early London days. And this time, they did not need to see her dance. They wanted to hear her sing and watch her act. She did a scene with the stage manager. That was it. She booked it. Sweet Charity opened at Caesar's Palace, still brand new at the time, by the way. She performed there for 6 months with only 1 day off every 2 weeks. Then she took the show to London, where she won the Evening Standard Theatre Award, the British equivalent of a Tony. She went on to star in Mame, first in London and later in Vegas, and touring productions across the U.S. She took the stage opposite Rock Hudson in I Do, I Do, charming critics with her timing and grace, and reportedly quick enough on her feet to keep Hudson from stepping on hers. She was the very first guest star on the pilot for The Muppet Show, chatting with Kermit and dancing in a stunning dreamlike sequence with 6 green gazelles. It was whimsical, weird, charming, and perfect. She performed at President Kennedy's inauguration. Nixon came to see her show in Los Angeles, and Reagan watched her perform If My Friends Could See Me Now at the Kennedy Center. Her bolero number became legendary, so iconic, in fact, that when she performed it at the Coconut Grove, the venue built a second stage just for that dance. It was the first time in their history they had ever done that. She was a regular on television, The Ed Sullivan Show, The Perry Como Show, The Sinatra specials. By the mid-1970s, she was often introduced as one of the most famous dancers in the world. She was everywhere. She worked hard, never stopped, and always delivered. And in Vegas, that consistency was rewarded. For 7 years, the city hosted the prestigious Entertainer of the Year Awards, and she won Female Entertainer of the Year 4 times. This is during the era of Liza Minnelli, Barbra Streisand, and Shirley MacLaine. She never stopped training either. In Los Angeles, as she got older, she took ballet classes every day. often at Stanley Holden's studio. Many times she was decades older than anyone else in the room, but her presence set the tone, a reminder to the younger dancers of what real discipline, real passion looked like. She became a devoted student and teacher of Bikram yoga. Even during chemotherapy, she kept showing up, leading classes, inspiring everyone around her. Still moving, still reaching, always dancing. Her name, Juliet Prowse. And now you know the rest of the story. All right, dance fam, there we are, another episode of the rest of the story. Before I get into a little bit more on Ms. Prowse, by the way, for years I think I would pronounce her name Prowse, and I now realize I was saying it wrong. It is Prowse. Anyway, if you enjoyed, if you feel like you learned something, you were inspired by her amazing story, do me a favor or do yourself a favor and subscribe, follow wherever you're watching or listening, share with some people, let's spread the word, let's build this dance podcast, give it a like, leave a comment, it all means a lot. So I always like to clarify that this series doesn't traffic in gossip, it just centers on dance and actually even less about the accomplishments of the performer, and I really try to dive deep into, their training, their youth, and the early struggling, you know what I'm saying? Anyway, there are a few public moments with Miss Prowse, acknowledged herself, that's important to me, that, are part of her story, and I feel like I should just address a couple of them. When Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, if I'm saying that correctly, visited the set of Can-Can, he famously, and this was a giant international, made all the headlines, he called one of her dances immoral. And that story, it made all the headlines, and it happened before the film even came out. So interestingly, overnight, her name was known around the world before the movie was even in theaters. She also had, and if you've heard of Miss Prowse, you may know this, she had romantic ties to two of the era's most iconic performers, Elvis Presley and Frank Sinatra. She was even briefly engaged to Sinatra, and that is a fact she addressed openly. Sinatra is on record actually calling her the sexiest dancer he had ever seen. In 1965, now all of these performers have endless credits, and inevitably people will say, oh my gosh, you forgot this, you forgot that, and I'm always like, no, I didn't. I very much pick and choose what I want to include, and I will include that in 1965, she took a rare film role outside the studio system, a gritty, stylized thriller called Who Killed Teddy Bear, where she starred opposite Sal Mineo. There's even a sexy and dangerous dance scene between the two of them. That movie was overlooked at the time, but later rediscovered as a cult classic of underground cinema. I gotta check that one out. It sounds really fascinating. And before I get to my story with Miss Prowse, I did mention in the main script that she had chemo, and she fought really hard, and she kept dancing. She was even, as I mentioned, teaching yoga during her treatment. That's just who she was. So she went into remission, and most people thought, yeah, of course, she beat it. She was so strong, so focused, but a couple years later, it did come back, and this time it took her, and she was only 59, gone way too young. My story is, if you ever watched The Rest of the Story on Paula Kelly, which I gotta tell you, I feel like Paula Kelly is my angel because that is the episode that really helped put this series on the map. It's the first one that really took off on YouTube. And because of it, I doubled my subscribers, and it's really been lovely. And I mentioned in that episode that Paula Kelly was a judge for a dance competition I did. And I even got emotional in that episode recounting the story. Anyway, so that competition was the Music Center Spotlight Awards in Los Angeles. It's the most prestigious dance competition in Los Angeles, at least it was for decades. Misty Copeland won it, gives you an idea, of the prestige behind it. I performed a solo on the stage at the Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, and I only made the connection later, by the way, after researching Paula Kelly, that she herself performed a solo on that very same stage for an Oscar ceremony. Anyway, the other judge with Paula Kelly was Juliet Prowse. There were a few other judges too, but I will do episodes on them no doubt in the future, so I will save that information. Prowse was always dancing, always teaching, always giving back, and just the fact that she was a judge in this competition is just another supportive example that she was there. She was there for younger dancers. And also, if you don't know this, Paula Kelly starred with Juliet Prowse in Sweet Charity in both Vegas and London. So this episode made me think, did they know that they would be judging this competition together before the competition and talk about it? Was it a surprise when they got there and they were like, oh my God, Paula, oh my God, Juliet? These are things I think about. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall, but just to know that these two geniuses judged me, watched me dance, and then selected me as the winner is just so flattering. It's such an honor. And anyway, I just wanted to mention that because somehow it just felt like a lovely way to button this piece. Okay, until next time.